For 3 agonizing years, my mother-in-law held our family hostage, pretending to be paralyzed. She forced us to be her round-the-clock caregivers, draining our finances, our patience, and our very souls. But what she didn't know was that I had a hidden camera, and what it recorded at AM was the truth that would blow her entire deceptive charade wide open. The family dinner where I showed everyone that footage. It wasn't just a meal, it was an intervention, and it was brutal. This is the story of how 3 years of lies unraveled in one shocking night. It all started 3 years ago. My name is Nora, my husband, Mark, and I had just settled into our new home, excited about our future. Then, out of the blue, Mark's mother, Karen, had a sudden accident. She claimed to have fallen down a flight of stairs, resulting in a severe spinal injury that left her completely paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors, after numerous tests, couldn't find a definitive cause for her paralysis, which was the first red flag. But they couldn't rule it out either. They called it functional neurological disorder, a fancy term that essentially meant her body was experiencing paralysis without a physical injury. Karen, being the dramatic person she always was, quickly embraced her new role. She moved in with us, citing her need for constant care, and our lives were instantly turned upside down. Every day became a grueling marathon of lifting, bathing, feeding, and managing her every need. Mark, being the devoted son, took on the bulk of the physical work, often waking up in the middle of the night to assist her. I tried my best to support, but my energy was quickly depleted. Our social life vanished. Our finances dwindled from medical expenses and her special needs, and the joy in our marriage began to fade under the immense pressure. Karen, far from being grateful, became increasingly demanding and manipulative. She thrived on the attention, constantly complaining about her suffering, yet somehow always managed to rally enough energy to dictate our lives. She isolated us from friends and even other family members, painting herself as the suffering matriarch abandoned by everyone except her loyal son and his wife. The first seeds of doubt were planted subtly. Karen would often claim agonizing pain, yet sometimes when she thought no one was watching, I'd catch a flicker of normalcy in her movements, a quick shift in her wheelchair that seemed too fluid, a reach for a remote that appeared almost effortless. These moments were fleeting, easily dismissed as wishful thinking or my own exhaustion playing tricks on me. But they lingered. Then there were the phone calls. She would be utterly helpless while I was in the room. But the moment I stepped out for a private conversation with a friend, her voice would boom from the living room, sounding perfectly normal and animated. Mark, too, began to notice things. The way her paralyzed leg would sometimes twitch in frustration, or how she could always miraculously maneuver her wheelchair to intercept us when we were having a quiet conversation. We'd try to talk to each other about it, but the guilt of even thinking she could be faking something so severe was immense. We loved her, or at least we thought we did, and the idea of her deceiving us was almost too painful to consider. The turning point came when her demands escalated to an unbearable level. She insisted we sell our dream home, claiming it wasn't accessible enough for her. Despite us having made extensive renovations, she wanted us to move to a smaller, single-story property closer to her doctors, which coincidentally was further from Mark's job and closer to her estranged sister, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. It was clear she wanted total control over our lives. That's when Mark, broken and defeated, finally looked at me and said, "What if? What if she's not paralyzed?" The words hung in the air, a terrifying thought we had both suppressed for too long. We knew we couldn't accuse her without undeniable proof. The emotional cost would be too high if we were wrong. So we decided to get proof. We purchased a small, discreet security camera, one that connected to our phones, allowing us to monitor the living room day and night. We installed it covertly, nestled amongst some books on a shelf, ensuring it had a clear view of her favorite spot in the living room and the path to the kitchen. The decision weighed heavily on us. We felt guilty, like we were betraying her, but the alternative was to let her continue to destroy our lives. The first few days were agonizing. We watched a feed constantly, Mark and I taking shifts, our hearts pounding every time Karen moved. Nothing. Just the usual shuffling, the sighs, the calls for assistance. We started to feel foolish, ashamed of our suspicions. Maybe we were just burned out and paranoid. Then, one Tuesday night, at precisely 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a motion alert from the camera. My heart leaped into my throat. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I watched as Karen, my supposedly paralyzed mother-in-law, slowly, almost cautiously, swung her legs off the bed. She stood up. She walked, first unsteadily, then with increasing confidence, across the living room to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water, stretched, and then I kid you not she did a little jig, a full-on, happy dance. My jaw dropped. I called Mark, my voice a frantic whisper. He came running, stared at the screen, and we watched her return to bed, climb back in, and arrange herself as if she'd never moved. She was perfectly fine. She had been faking it for 3 years. The wave of emotions that washed over us was overwhelming: disbelief, rage, hurt, and an enormous sense of betrayal. We watched the footage repeatedly, our minds racing through every lie, every manipulation, every sacrifice we had made. This wasn't just a simple deception. It was an elaborate, cruel, and calculated act that had robbed us of our lives. We spent the rest of the night compiling evidence. We scrolled through weeks of footage, finding more instances of her walking, bending, and doing things she claimed were impossible. The proof was undeniable. The next day was a blur. We contacted Mark's sister, Sarah, who had always been skeptical of Karen's condition but had been shut out by Karen's constant complaints about not feeling supported. We cautiously explained our findings and sent her clips of the footage. Sarah was initially shocked, then furious. She immediately agreed that this couldn't go on. Together, we planned an intervention. It had to be done carefully, decisively, and with an unshakable resolve. We decided on a family dinner that upcoming Sunday. We invited other close relatives who had been impacted by Karen's demands, not telling them the full story, only that there was a serious family matter to discuss. We wanted them to witness the truth firsthand. Sunday arrived, thick with tension. The air in the dining room was so heavy you could cut it with a knife. Karen, oblivious, was in her element, complaining about the food and demanding attention. My hands trembled under the table. Mark looked pale, but his resolve was clear. After dessert, Mark cleared his throat. "Mom," he began, his voice strained. "We need to talk about something very important." Karen immediately looked offended. "What could be more important than my health, dear? I'm exhausted." That's when I stood up. "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "it's about your health, or rather, your lack of it." I walked over to the TV, which was connected to my laptop. The room went silent. Karen's eyes widened, a flicker of fear replacing her usual arrogance. I hit play. The footage started. The blurry AM clip. Karen swinging her legs, standing up, walking to the kitchen, doing her little jig. The collective gasp in the room was deafening. Plates clattered. Chairs scraped back. Karen's face, initially pale, turned a furious shade of red. She spluttered, That's not real. It's doctored. You're trying to frame me." But the camera kept rolling, showing more clips, more days, more moments of her perfectly normal movements. Sarah, sitting opposite, finally broke the silence. "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "we've all been worried sick. We've rearranged our lives, our finances. For this?" Karen tried to deflect, to accuse us of cruelty, of fabricating lies. But her protests were weak against the overwhelming evidence. The other family members, shocked and bewildered, looked from the screen to Karen, their faces a mix of anger and profound sadness. The intervention was indeed brutal. There were tears, shouting, and accusations, but for the first time in 3 years, Karen was truly speechless. The aftermath was difficult, but necessary. Karen was forced to move out of our home. We presented her with a choice: get legitimate psychological help for her manipulative behavior, or be cut off from the family. She, of course, chose defiance initially, but faced with undeniable evidence and a united front from the family, she eventually conceded to seek counseling. The family slowly began to heal. Trust was shattered, and it will take a long time to rebuild. But the truth, no matter how painful, had set us free. We learned a hard lesson about setting boundaries, about trusting our instincts, and about the devastating impact of prolonged deception. Our lives slowly returned to normal. Mark and I rediscovered the joy in our marriage. Our finances started to recover, and we reclaimed our home and our peace of mind. It was a long, dark 3 years, but ultimately justice was served. This story serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the ones closest to us can be the most deceptive, and that standing up for yourself, even when it's incredibly difficult, is always the right thing to do. Whoa, that exposure hits different. Deceit crushed by cold facts. If it fired you up, slam that like and drop in comments sneakiest kin con you've busted. Subscribe for more raw revenge yarns that pack the punch. Till next.